Wheel with me, Joe White of the High Speed Rodeo newsletter on Substack, and my partner in crime here, Tu Lee of Sino Auto Insights, who's also on Substack. We're going to be diving into the latest news and trends in the world of cars this week. Tesla's worldwide sales collapse, or problems, if you prefer, is front and center. We're also going to look at the fight over carbon dioxide rules and the phase out of combustion vehicles that's going on in Europe. Um, and mark your calendars on December 15, Tu and I plan to do our last at the wheel for the year. We're going to look at the year in review. You remember what happened in January? No, I don't either, because there's been so much going on over the past 11 or
Uh,
12 months. Um, we always have a lot to say. None of it should be taken as investment advice. Two, so I have been looking. I wrote my high speed rodeo today. Let it off with a look at Tesla's sale. It's a sales collapse. I mean, they're down 40+% in Europe. They're on the run in China. U.S. numbers are a little harder to come by, but it looks like they're down double digits in the United States as well. And yeah, it looks like something that's more than a blip. I mean, if this were any other car company, there would be a lot of people saying, "What is happening?" And the company's stock might have taken more of a hit than Tesla's has. What do you make of it? And maybe let's start with China, and we can go kind of around the world a little bit and look what's going on.
right on. Hey, great seeing you, Joe. Happy holidays, and happy
Yeah, happy
holidays to
holidays.
everyone that's listening and viewing. Let me pull out to a macro level of Tesla. 2023, they're at, I want to say, 1.81 million units, with about a good 30%, 30-ish percent from China, 30-ish percent from the United States, and the rest of the world making up the rest of that volume. Last year, they're flat effectively. Let's say they shrank technically, right? They were at
Hmm.
like 1.79 million units,
Hmm.
which for a company that's $1 trillion market cap doesn't seem like a growth company when you're flat and EV sales are continuing to grow in the rest of the world. They continue that downward trend. Reuters, I think Bloomberg, a few others are forecasting that they might not hit 1.65 million units this year. Okay. And if we look at China, we always think of Tesla as a US company, US based company, but their importance, or China's importance to them, can't be understated. 45 to 50% of their production comes out of China. Most of that is domestically consumed, but any of the overage gets shipped to Europe, to Japan, to Korea, to Australia. And so when and they already have this capacity baked in. So we're looking at idle capacity if they're not hitting that 1.8, 1.9, 2 million unit
No, absolutely.
annual volume. So
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I don't like to sort of say, oh, everybody else is missing something that only I see. But in a lot of the reporting about Tesla, one of the things that I think has been overlooked, and I called it out today, and you just called it out, is that their capacity is sized for a bigger company than they are, which made sense when their growth was at 20, 30% per annum. I mean, that you compound that and you get to double really quick. But if you're not growing, so here's what's happening. It's a problem. So here's what in Germany, pardon me, not in Europe, the latest numbers from the European Automotive Association basically suggest or state that Tesla's going to be lucky to get to 200,000 vehicle sales in Europe this year. They sold fewer than 7,000 vehicles in Europe in October, which is a pretty weak performance. Um, their Berlin factory has capacity for 375,000. And if just get the complexities of Tesla's distribution, aside, there's 175,000 vehicles worth of capacity that they have no use for in the European market. They're not selling to capacity in Shanghai anymore either. Shanghai is big enough to produce almost a million vehicles a year. Their sales within China are well short of what would be required to soak up that capacity. And in October, this is data which you probably know, but I mean, it's been out from the Chinese reporting authorities, the Passenger Car Association. If you put their exports and their sales within China together, you don't get to 80% of Shanghai's capacity. And 80%, I mean, is roughly what you need to kind of have a decently profitable
To
operation. Actually,
break
you want
even
to
almost,
break
right?
even. I mean, you actually want to be working at 100+% of capacity to really make money, but 80% is kind of like the minimum that you should be at to have any kind of a decent return. And on the number, kind of on the face of it, Tesla Shanghai is now below that. Um, Tesla Austin, I mean, whatever capacity they have for the Cybertruck isn't being used. I think that's pretty clear.
They're
You
trying
know,
to they're trying to soak some of that up with the Cybercab, which they're supposed to be launching.
supposed to be launching, but they haven't yet, and who knows? So I look at it and I just think, I mean, I understand that Elon Musk has said this Tesla is an AI company, or we're going to be the leaders in physical AI applied to mobility, to machines, to robots, whatever. Fine. Right now, Tesla's an EV company, and that EV company is not doing well. I mean, I guess again, let me ask you from a Chinese perspective, because it does seem like part of the problem Tesla has is in China, where it seems like the competition there really is just got the better of them. I mean, I thought this new Model Y was supposed to solve all that. What happened?
Well, let's unpack this, Joe. But look at this globally. The the legacy OEMs, whether they're German, European, Korean, or Japanese, they now have come out with vehicles that are almost as good as the Model 3 and a Model Y.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. So there's real competition that is hitting the Model Y and the Model 3 around the world. In China, let's multiply that by 100, because that's what's
Yeah.
happening in China.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Model 3 launched in China in 2020, and it's been largely unchanged except for some cosmetic changes and some software updates. The Model Y launched a year later. So these vehicles are getting into 4, 5, 6 years old,
Hmm.
okay, without major refreshes. And then if you look at the China market, the mass market is well under 30,000, 35,000 US dollars. And so Tesla plays just outside of that.
Hmm.
And I'll add some other wrinkles, but I'll want your comments as well. Now, there's real competition, and then in Europe and the United States, he's been politicized. Okay, so
Yeah,
there's
no,
a,
yeah,
a-
that's
a-
right, and that's right, but I guess I wonder, and this is, I mean, this is conjecture on my part, but it seems like that was an excuse that Tesla bulls could have used, 3, 4, 5 months ago.
exactly.
Now, I mean, Musk has been mostly off the political scene since he broke with Trump. I think that during the summer. It seems so long ago. I forget the exact month, but he's been out of the administration, out of Doge, out of all that stuff for months, and he's returned his attention to a lot of things. Nominally Tesla, but frankly more AI. And his AI ventures than Tesla and SpaceX and all that. And in Europe, I think the same thing is true, although maybe the ill will caused by his forays into like German politics lasted longer there. But I get, and again, this is an opinion that using his political activity from earlier in this year and late last year as an excuse for people not buying the product today, it seems like there's a sell by date on that has passed.
Well, I
That's
agree. And I'm going to add to this because you said 350, 375 units, 1,000 units in Berlin Giga, about a million units. I'm going to say closer to 1.2 with overtime and things like that. We're
hmm.
probably
Hmm.
getting to well over a million units in
Hmm.
Shanghai Giga. And remember that they got concessions from local governments for tax abatements, for free
Yeah.
land, for,
Hmm.
you know, economic development KPIs that if they don't hit, they're going to have to pay penalties on in Shanghai, probably in Berlin Giga, and even Austin likely. Okay, so not only does not having a high utilization rate hurt you from a sales standpoint, it penalizes you likely because they got
Hmm.
so many discounts up front to build
Yeah.
there. And
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
only a couple of years removed, Joe, from Shanghai Giga was talking about increasing to 2 million units at one point in
Well,
time.
yeah, and
And
and and
so
and and Musk and it does seem like a long time ago, but Musk was talking about building another plant in Mexico, and then not in Mexico, somewhere else. But that's talk seems to have gone by the boards, at least for the time being. That because they don't need extra capacity. It's yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do because I mean they've got uh, they've got kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, which legacy car companies know quite well, which is when we've got sales that are falling below capacity, falling below profitable utilization. There's a temptation which Tesla has tried to, and the Chinese car companies are doing, which is to slash prices and throw profits to the wolves and just go for volume. That can destroy your financials and your brand um, just as quickly as doing nothing. On the other hand, if you sit and say, well, the volume will take care of itself someday, and we'll figure it out. You could go for a long time not making as much money as you want to make, as you need to make. So we'll see what happens. And I mean, I have to say, it's a little bit of a red flag that Michael Burry, Mr. Big Short from the mortgage market, um, it's too bad he doesn't have Margot Robbie doing all of the explanations for his opinions. But he's now on Substack, and he's laid into Tesla. Said it's so ridiculously overvalued, and a lot of people pay attention to what he
shareholders will be
says.
diluted.
Yeah, shareholders. Yeah, I mean, he has a more specific argument about that. Yeah, shareholders are going to be diluted by Musk's compensation plans. The company's overvalued. So it'll be interesting to see if any of that, those kinds of comments from people like that, people like Michael Burry, make a difference. I mean, I looked up Tesla's market cap when I was writing my newsletter. It's $1.35 trillion. I mean, it's the only Western car company that matters, right? As far as anyone in the investor community is concerned, and it still does.
They're
So
still worth more than every other car maker in the world combined
yeah, yeah.
by a
So
large margin.
people like me who tend to look at car companies as car companies and say, well, you're not selling out your capacity, you're not selling your product, and it's bad. Maybe we don't know what we're talking about. Maybe it is all about AI. But speaking of AI, I want to ask you. You mentioned this. Um, XPeng, the Chinese car company, EV company, apparently had an AI day, right? Sort of along the lines of what Tesla has been doing. What can you say about that? I mean, they're trying to be positioned as an AI company too, I guess. But what do you see there, and what might be the contrast with what we see from Tesla?
So yeah, you know this saying, Joe, and I'll just say ideas are like elbows. Everybody's got them,
Hmm. Hmm.
but executing and being on time with your execution are the things that are difference makers in the business
Hmm.
world.
Hmm.
So right now, Elon and Tesla have not had to pay the price for consistent delays across different products, whether it's the next electric vehicle, the next service, the next humanoid. So Xpeng, since day one, they've always positioned themselves, at least in the China market, as the most technologically advanced EV brand, mass market brand. And so they're leaning into that and they're moving into humanoids, robo taxis. They go a step further than Tesla because they have eVTOL. Okay. And so that's what He Xiaopeng's AI day a couple of weeks ago, about a month ago, was all
Hmm.
about. Okay. And not only are they executing or plan to execute, they're making their own silicon. And they are, hold on a second here. They're making their own, jeez, they're making their own silicon
Hmm.
and they're selling it to Volkswagen.
Yeah, that's right.
This is
Their
the
partner.
difference between Tesla and everybody else. And we can get into it later, maybe in the year review, but there's a list of silicon design companies in China that are all trying to eat Nvidia's lunch and Qualcomm's lunch. So these are things that we should be talking about. The other thing that I wanted to mention about Tesla, and this is the China angle now. Not only is Tesla not doing well because of the domestic competition in China? But even if g- let's rewind 3 years, they were like 20 million units, right? We want to double Toyota effectively. That's what Elon said.
Oh yeah, I
So
remember
that
that.
means you know what a high runner is. It means a product that sells millions of units alone.
Hmm. Hmm.
That means that 20 million units, Tesla would need 3 or 4 high runners. We're talking Model 2, Model 1.5, but now everywhere they go outside of China, guess who meets them and greets them? BYD, Geely, Chery, that live in this mass market, that are used to playing razor thin margins. So anywhere Tesla goes and launches a Model 2, they're not going to be these smash hits that will lead to 3, 4 million units in
Yeah.
sales by this product alone, which really, and that's why the narrative has changed for Elon, because now they're an AI company, now they're a robotics company, because they cannot be a sales volume company anymore on the electric vehicles, because the Chinese companies won't allow them to do that.
No, that's right. And Reuters had a piece today by my colleague, former colleague Nick Carey, which I'd urge everyone to read. It's adjacent to this topic, which is talking about how the Chinese automakers and also the Western automakers that have factories in China are just, because they can't sell. And so a lot of this has to do with combustion, but some of it has to do with EVs, which is makes it relevant for Tesla, right? But the Chinese market is a mess, right? It's got this price war that's just destroying profitability across scores of companies there. The combustion vehicle capacity in China, is basically, cratered, and the utilization of it is cratered. So now you have these Chinese companies like Chery, Geely, and other state-owned companies, Dongfeng, companies like that, that are just putting boat,
GAC,
yeah,
Chang'an,
GAC, that are just putting cars on boats because they can't sell them in China. They're flooding the middle class and poorer countries of the world with these vehicles. Many of these vehicles are combustion. I mean, basically, they've got combustion capacity that they're offloading onto the rest of the world. But a fair chunk of it is also electric. And there you go. If you're Tesla, frankly, if you're anybody, but if you're Tesla, that's a problem. I mean, it just goes to your point that they're sort of the white space that they were able to profit from so well 3, 4, 5 years ago. That white space is mostly, it's gone. I don't know if it's mostly gone. It's all gone. Seems like so.
well,
You know,
let's point back to this really quickly, Joe, because this is where China EV Inc. and China Legacy Inc. throws a monkey wrench in everybody's game and
that's for
everybody's
sure.
works.
Hmm.
In Southeast Asia, the Japanese traditionally very strong, Toyota, Honda, Nissan. If you go to Thailand, you go to Indonesia, there's these small trucks that you always see a Toyota or a Honda brand, or likely a Nissan brand. So
Hmm.
they go into Southeast Asia, undercut. BYD becomes the number one uh, clean energy vehicle brand within months. Okay, so emerging markets, the Chinese dominate, or will go to dominate. But if you look at Latin America, another emerging market that has growing economics, who dominates there? The Fiats, the Chevys,
Hmm.
and some
Hmm.
of the Western, the Fords. But guess what? Now the Chinese are coming to Latin America, to Mexico, and they have sharp elbows. And so no one, we can talk about Tesla, but no one is immune to what's happening with the Chinese
Yeah.
because of the exporting,
Yeah.
because they can export ICEs and they can export clean energy vehicles. Either way,
Yeah. They
Cherry
both
is
fit on the boats.
really in a sweet spot. Yeah, Cherry's
Yeah.
in a sweet spot just because they still make
Hmm.
BEVs and ICEs. So
Yeah, yeah, and they do have, notwithstanding some changes in policy, they do have the government, the central government, and also the provincial governments that behind them, for the same reasons that a company like Volkswagen, or for that matter General Motors, does, because no political leader in any country that has an auto industry wants that auto industry to wither away. State-owned companies have a tendency to survive for the long term, even if they're zombies.
and let's make sure we call out loosely what a state-owned enterprise is, because Volkswagen seems to be state-owned because they're 17% owned by Lower
Mhm.
Saxony. So
Mhm.
so Volkswagen, General Motors was bailed out
Yeah,
by the U.S. government. They're completely private now, but
right.
they were publicly owned for quite some time before they paid back that loan. But so we paint Chinese companies as these state-owned enterprises, but again, we don't hear about the GACs and the FAWs. We hear about the startups, the BYDs, the Cherries, the
Hmm.
Geelys,
Hmm.
and so it's these independent companies outside of China, anyways, that are making waves. But
Yeah.
this segues great into the next topic that you and I wanted to talk about, and that's the emissions restrictions
Right.
or the elimination of petrol and diesel engine vehicle production in Europe by 2035.
That was the
So,
goal anyway. Yeah. That
so
once was the
you had
goal.
written a little bit about this in your newsletter. So tell us about what you wrote
Yeah,
about.
yeah. I mean, and this is something that's been simmering for quite some time, but it's now appears to be about to come to a head. The European Union, the basically Brussels, for had issued regulations that basically amounted to a mandatory phase out of new combustion vehicle production by 2035, and over the last couple of years, but with increasing um, volume and intensity this year, the incumbent car companies in Europe and some of some of their host governments, particularly Germany, have started to say, look, this is not going to work. This is not realistic. You're going to kill the industry. You're going to kill thousands of jobs if you persist in these. Uh, if you persist with this ban and persist with the ever tightening constraints on carbon CO2 emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, climate gas emissions between now and then. Um, so within the past couple of weeks, we had John Elkann, the chairman of Stellantis, saying that the European auto industry could go into irreversible decline. That quote around that irreversible decline, unless Brussels backs off on these CO2 and rules. They're basically climate rules. The German government has said you got to back off. Stellantis' CEO, unsurprisingly echoing his boss, said, you need to back off. So there's a from the legacy industry, there's a lot of pressure, and from the unions as well. The unions, who represent all the workers at Fiat and Mercedes and Volkswagen and all these companies, they're on board with this. So there's a lot of pressure in mid December.
I will with a caveat, Joe, because there's a recent article by the Guardian, a UK media outlet, that said that Volvo CEO and Polestar CEO says you're basically letting the fox into the hen house if you
Mhm.
slow this transition down, because the
Yeah.
Chinese will take advantage of this for sure, and they'll bring affordable EVs to Europe. And one other thing, with Elkan talking about layoffs and things like that, Spain is recruiting all types of Chinese investment
Oh, absolutely.
into
Hmm.
into production capacity. And one other thing that's really notable is that Stellantis and CATL are going to build a battery factory, and
Right.
it's gonna cost 4 billion euro. It sounds eerily like the Ford CATL Marshall, Michigan factory.
Well,
They
yeah,
have not
it might
figured
be.
out where they're gonna build the
They
factory
just
yet, but
redirect the machinery that was going to go to Marshall to send it to Europe. Um,
here's the
well,
thing, Joe, before I let you add your comments. This is going to be the same situation in the United States when China enters the market. The legacy OEMs are going to be like, you're going to devastate the market, and the Chinese will be like, we'll hire your employees.
yeah.
We'll hire those guys because
What,
we need them.
well, they might not
So,
hire the UAW represented incumbent employees of some of the
but
Detroit auto
Americans,
companies,
they'll hire
but they'll hire
Americans to build their
Americans.
cars, right?
They'll hire Americans for sure. Just as the Japanese and the Koreans and the Germans did when they brought their factories onshore in the United States. No, you're right. I mean, I do think that is the tension, right? There's a and it is similar. It rhymes certainly with the situation in the
Hmm.
United States. Um, where you have where in the United States was actually the government, the Trump administration in Washington that sort of zeroed out the EV requirements or EV mandates, if you will, from the Biden administration. Here, it's a little more kind of a traditional dynamic in which you have the central regulators in Brussels saying, look, the climate, and we got to do something about climate change. We got to act. This is a real emergency. You all in the auto industry need to make this transition happen. And the auto industry is saying we can't do it that fast. And it's interesting because eh, I mean, you or I, or certainly I, can kind of stand here and make the argument for, and then stand this way and make the argument con. I mean, does the industry have a legitimate concern that right now most of the legacy companies who employ most of the people in the European auto sector, they're the ones supporting the jobs, that for the most part, they cannot sell EVs profitably at current prices. The Chinese and Tesla can, but they can't. So if you
especially with the progressively restrictive supply chain that is banned from using Chinese components.
Right. Yes. I mean, so you have another sort of devil's choice where, either you become dependent on China for components and particularly batteries, but not just batteries, right? Batteries and lots of other stuff.
Magnets.
Magnets, yeah, you become more dependent on China, which is for the most part is viewed as a bad thing in the West, and probably with good reason, given that China seems to be totally comfortable using those things as weaponry and diplomatic and military, and economic conflict. Okay,
We
so
did
so
them
you,
a favor. We did them a favor
yeah, by handing
by
that over.
outsourcing all that.
Yeah. So you can sort of say, from the industry perspective, and now I'm sort of putting myself in the voice of the, kind of legacy European industry. It's not like they don't have any points at all in saying, look, you have to be cautious. On the other hand, you're right, and it does seem like companies like Stellantis and Volkswagen obviously recognize this, that if they just go to sleep and don't invest in EV technology, they could wake up. They could wake up in a situation where they're as badly off or even worse as if things had stayed put. I mean, they have to they have to invest in EV technology. So it does seem like what they're saying is, look, don't mandate this by a certain timeline. Let the marketplace figure out what the timeline is, and let us figure out how to meet the market demand, and without burning billions in capital that they don't kind of have, right, or they can ill afford. Let us figure this out, and maybe it takes, maybe it's by 2040 that we're 80% EV across the European market, or 90%, not 2035, but we'll get there. Um, and so it'll be interesting to see what the European regulators do. I mean, I have a bet, and it seems kind of obvious. I have a bet that the European regulators, especially given Germany's heft within the European Union structure, um, that the European Union is going to say, okay, fine, we're going to let car companies get more flexibility for how you comply. You still got to work down the CO2 emissions. You can't just run gasoline and diesel as if it was in 1993. But we're not going to shut off all combustion technology by 2035. Hybrids will be okay. Plug-in hybrids will be okay. Super efficient
More
gasoline.
highly efficient engines.
Yeah,
Porsche is creating more highly efficient engines, and they're saying that should be okay as well.
right. Exactly. So I mean, that seems like the path that they're likely to take, given the political reality, and given that I don't think very many national governments in Europe, um, possible exception, I suppose, Norway or Sweden for Volvo. I don't think that many national governments in Europe, France, Germany, Italy, the UK, are going to sit still and have their national champion automakers start shedding jobs left and right. I don't think that's going to happen.
But this is
So
where it gets really interesting and very complicated, because countries like Spain, Hungary, Poland, who are likely to get that foreign direct investment from the Chinese automakers, are going to push back and say, you know what? Look, you guys had all these years to lead the European Union, and now we have these opportunities to grow our economies. That's not fair. And I want to point this as kind of is it six in one hand, half a dozen in the other if we look at the United States in our situation? Because the Trump administration, during the one big beautiful bill, had basically defanged cafe standards. So now there are
Right,
no
right,
fines for cafe standard
right,
for missing the cafe restrictions. And then they tried to take away California's ability to create their own emission standards.
right.
And for those that don't know, California is by far the largest passenger vehicle market in the United States. Normally, what happens is California sets the emission standard, and the legacy automakers begrudgingly
hmm
um, try to hit those targets because
Yeah.
they don't want to make a car for California and a different car for
No,
the rest of the
no,
United States.
they tuned to the California, song basically on this.
And so I feel like this is almost the equivalent of what's going on in the EU, California being the EU
Yeah, California.
creating
Yeah,
these restrictions. But the one thing that I wanted to ask you is, like, I do you feel that this is creating an opening for the Chinese to really, because as a consumer, passenger vehicle prices are going the wrong way, okay?
yeah, and that's
And
yeah, and that's right, and they're definitely going the wrong way. Yeah, I,
recent memory will tell us, because of Stellantis during COVID, prices only went up, right? So they're not doing any favors to the consumer. So they can cry and whine about losing jobs, but if I can't afford your product, then you're losing
yeah.
sales either way. So it's a this vicious
Well, that's
circle
true. I mean, the
maybe.
EV. I mean, and you're pointing to something that I think is really important. The electric vehicle, the regulatory debate, the electric vehicle debate, if you want to call it that, the carbon debate, the climate debate, is getting wound up with the affordability debate. You know, electric vehicles, at least in the United States, I think it's also largely true in Europe. Most electric vehicles are more expensive, kind of like for like, than a comparable gasoline vehicle. I mean, prices vary, but that's basically what you see. Um,
Prime
and
example is the Escalade.
yeah, 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 yeah. It's even more grotesquely expensive as an electric vehicle. Um, right, and I was looking at California registration data, which the California New Car Dealers Association publishes on their website. It's quite interesting because, first of all, you're right. I mean, California is a country-sized market, not hiding, but wrapped up within the United States. It's a country-sized market, and what you see there, first of all, combustion vehicles sell quite well in California, but when you look at segments, and they segment it out, luxury segments, luxury sedans, mid-sized luxury SUVs are over half electric, over half EV now in California. The latest data, it's over half. 41% or something like that of large luxury SUVs are now electric in California. So for affluent people buying luxury vehicles, and electric is increasingly what those folks want to buy. And if you are Cadillac, if you are Lexus, if you are Mercedes, um, that's a fact you have to deal with. But then now look at the other side of the spectrum. Um, the non-luxury is how they put it in the dealer association data, but basically affordable vehicles. That's 3.6%. Non-luxury cars, Corolla, Hyundai Sonata, that kind of thing. Good cars, but only 3.6% of people who bought those vehicles new bought something electric in that space. So it does seem like the one of the problems with pushing the industry to go electric faster is that electric technology still is not cheap enough outside of the Chinese, as you point out. It's not cheap enough outside of the Chinese manufacturers to be accessible to a middle class family, or certainly a working, blue collar, well, it depends on the blue collar job. Some blue collar jobs make a lot of money these days, but people with an average income or a slightly below average income, electric vehicles are still kind of out of reach or not practical. So I think it is very complicated, and it's going to require technology breakthroughs. It's going to require infrastructure that doesn't exist yet. It's going to require the auto companies to rework their cost structures. And none of that has happened. And forcing it with a deadline, at least in Europe, well, actually, in both the United States and Europe, forcing it with a deadline, a regulatory deadline, has proven to be a loser, both politically and I think probably also from an industrial and economic point of view. Um,
But I feel that how you're describing it has been what California has done traditionally for the last couple of decades by incre- continue to increase the emission standards. It's forced the automakers to really get more fit. I think in your I think that the situation currently is different because we don't have this evolutionary um, way to compete with the Chinese. We need to, your point, think of things differently, basically lop an arm and a leg off in order to be
yeah,
competitive because at this point in time, the legacy automakers are way too fat. So there's going to be layoffs. There's already a ton of layoffs in the tier one level. There's already a lot of retrenchment
yeah,
at
that's right.
GM. It's only 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 at a
But it
time, but it
adds
all
up.
adds up. And
No,
so
that's yeah, that no, that's right. And I do think that the marketplace, I mean, I guess I didn't say it that well to begin with. Let me try it again. I think what you see in the marketplace, starting with affluent buyers, but eventually working to, uh, people with more modest incomes, mere six-figure incomes, if you will. Um, I do think that you're seeing a lot of people are going to choose electric vehicles, and they will want them, not because the government told them to buy them, but because they're cool and they want them. So I do think the industry has got to figure out a way to do both at the same time, which is to develop competitive electric vehicles, figure out, as you say, what it is that the Chinese, go to the fitness gym that the Chinese have basically created, for the global auto industry. And a lot of people talk about it that way, that China is like the fitness gym. Um, go to that gym and figure out how to compete. Um, and then from the regulatory point of view, figure out a way to still have some sticks and carrots so the auto industry doesn't just say, oh, well, we'll just sell 1980s technology until the cows come home. Um, but do that in a way that doesn't sort of create kind of, so much financial and investment uncertainty or pressure that the industry just kind of breaks. And that seems to be the challenge.
and this points back, my comment now points back to what you had said about letting the market decide, because some inertia on the private enterprise side is already being created because GM has launched a $30,000 Equinox that effectively becomes a $37,000 electric vehicle. The Blazer is a little bit more expensive, but
Mhm.
if we look at end of 26, now we get into Rivian's R2, we get into Lucid's Beva Gravity, we get into Slate. And so I think there could be this trough of demand for electric vehicles or clean energy vehicles, but we should have some sizzle coming into mid 26, early 27. And as long as infrastructure continues to be created and innovations in charging speed and battery range is still continue to be a focus, I think the United States, because to be frank and honest, Europe doesn't have a Rivian. Europe doesn't have a Lucid.
No, they don't have a Tesla.
Europe doesn't have a Tesla. Exactly. So they're they are afraid of actually becoming a bystander in the 21st
Yeah, well,
century.
and that's a whole nother podcast, which I may be out of my depth on. The extent to which, I mean, because I've been reading these headlines, I mean, and it's not just in the automotive sector, although the automotive, as always, is a good proxy for broader economic concerns. But I mean, you've seen it. I mean, there is a lot of talk in sort of the high castles in Europe of like, uh-oh, we're behind. We're not in the game on AI. We're not in the game on electrification of automobiles. We're not. They're in the game, but we're not leading the game, and a lot of concern about that, right? And concern that China is kind of running away with everything, and that what China doesn't dominate, the U.S. does. So you're right. That is a concern for European companies, and certainly in the auto sector, I think it's a concern. Um, it'll be interesting to see how things play out. You're right. I mean, a year from now, when we're here, and we see kind of how like the R2 Rivian's R2 and vehicles like that play. We may have a wholly different analysis, right? We may be seeing a rebirth of demand for EVs, from this kind of trough that we're in right now. The things I had to say about California will be rendered irrelevant. We'll see what happens. So that's the thing, right? I mean, if you think you can predict what's going to happen in this industry, forget it. It's just become nigh on impossible.
Let me throw another monkey wrench at you, Joe, because as a dad who has a teenage son or about to be teenage son who wants an e-scooter so he can ride it to school. Now that those things are much more affordable, they're going to start replacing bicycles and walking. And then you point back to Waymo, Zoox, Neuro, all these companies that there's this renaissance of autonomous vehicles. Uber
Hmm.
partnering with everybody and their mother, Lyft
Hmm.
starting to
Hmm.
become a fleet owner. And
Yeah.
so the concept of vehicle ownership is going to change in the next decade. And how that affects sales volume is going to be very, very important. Do the OEMs become contract manufacturers for the Ubers and the
or
Waymos?
or fleet
Do they
owners.
try to create exactly?
Hmm.
And what's the dealer's role now? Because we
Good
probably
question.
already have too many dealers per brand
Yeah, we do.
in the United States.
God love them, but
But
we do.
and
Yeah.
this is some of the stuff that we talk about and think about for our clients, on the consulting side. But to have a well-rounded conversation, that's probably the best way to do it. And maybe we can talk about that in our year end as
Yeah, I
some
think
of
that's
the
a good
things
topic
that
for the year end. Yeah, the year end review. I will say, just before we hopped on, I was reading an op-ed piece in the New York Times written by a doctor whose name I'm now not remembering, so I won't try to guess. But it's in today's New York Times online. Long piece, long piece, basically making the case using data sourced from Waymo and other sources, making the case that it is time for the government to really push a shift to autonomous vehicles because the accident rates for autonomous, or certainly Waymo's autonomous vehicles, I want to underscore that the data that bolster this argument come from Waymo. The Waymo's autonomous vehicles are in fact considerably safer than human drivers, and as a public health matter, rather than continue to tolerate sort of an ambient 35 to 40,000 people killed on highways every year in this country, let alone everywhere else. We should be pushing a shift to AVs. I thought it was an interesting piece, and yeah, we could talk about this in our next one because that goes back to kind of my qualms about how quickly you can change culture and attitudes in any country, but certainly this one. I'm going to probably, I might hop in my combustion Jeep and go to Home Depot at some random time today because I feel like it, right? And I'm not going to wait for some Waymo to come and get me. The doctor who wrote that piece would say, "Well, why not, you idiot? Because your chances of hurting someone with, by rear-ending someone with your Jeep are so high." Anyway, I think there's a lot there,
have
and you're
you
right.
let me ask you, Joe, have you ridden in an autonomous vehicle yet?
Not not recently, which means no. I mean, I have, but it was so long ago that the experience, I think, based on everything I read, the experience is irrelevant. I mean, the Waymo experience today is far different than anything I would have experienced when I had a test drive
I'm gonna
before.
call a mutual friend out in this podcast. I won't name the company, but if we can bully him into doing this, bully them into doing this, maybe we'll have an opportunity to try one in Vegas during CES.
That would, well, yeah, and we can ask nicely. We don't have to bully anybody.
Yeah, we can ask
We're
very
such nice
nicely.
guys. They'll do it just because, No, that would
So
be fun. We
let
could
me
do
let me.
we could do the podcast from the back of a Waymo or
Oh yeah, we could.
or not a Waymo. Yeah,
I
whatever. I
need to
think I
figure
know
out
who
the
you
camera
mean. Yeah, I
setup for
know who you
that.
mean. And yeah, we'll
I need to
back
figure
of
the
an
camera
autonomous
setup.
vehicle. Yeah.
That being said, let me end our podcast on this. Waymo, who I've seen present twice over the last month and a half. First of all, um, they are by far the most transparent autonomous vehicle company. Not Uber, but Tesla wants to hide any of its findings, any of its data in California specifically, because the state of California required you to do quarterly reports
Mhm.
of interventions and things like that that your safety drivers have. And so Tesla wants none of that. And then the Chinese autonomous vehicle companies, they don't really offer so much transparency either.
Mhm.
I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago in Silicon Valley. Steve Wesley was presenting, and he had made the argument that until other companies share their data and are much more transparent about it, Waymo is the clear leader. And if you look at um, Waymo and their ambitions over the next 18, 24 months, they're going to be in 40, 50, 60 cities, including Detroit, including
Including
New
Detroit.
York, including
Yeah.
London. We
Mhm.
point out Detroit and New York because they're four season cities. And so, Joe, you and I are going to start seeing Waymos en masse, likely in Detroit, starting in January, February, because it wants to collect the data when the roads are like they are right now in
Yeah, like, yeah,
Michigan, a little
like I'm
bit
looking out
snowy,
at
a little bit.
snow. Yeah. Slick.
And so, um, and he made a great point. You know, I've experienced the Chinese autonomous vehicles, but I can't tell you quantitatively, definitively that one is better than another. I just know it from a qualitative standpoint. Within 3-4 minutes, I'm talking to the other passenger like it's nothing, which means that I've the process in my mind that no one's really driving this vehicle except for an algorithm is kind of because I feel safe, right? And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
and we're gonna start to see services companies push into really, really taking, let's say, rides away. Because if we look at OEMs and cars as basically things that give people rides, let's measure it like an Uber, right? Like
Mhm.
if we measure it that way, are the OEMs at risk because they're not providing services yet? You know, I think long
Right, or
term,
or
those are the
certainly
things
missing,
that
yeah, yeah, or certainly, missing out on a revenue opportunity that they sorely need, given that, as we kind of started out this conversation, sales volume, just regular old sales volume is harder and harder to come by. Certainly profitable sales volume is harder and harder to come by. And so, where do you go to kind of find adjacent revenue? And as you know, right, as you say, if you're not in autonomous services, and you're not in aftermarket parts, and you're not in this, and you're not in that. By the way, all these things car companies have tried in the past to varying degrees and have been
credit to
rotten.
GM, credit
Yeah,
GM.
yeah, yeah. Well, they've tried, and it's not worked out because they're really good at manufacturing vehicles and running global supply chains, not so good at running, junkyards and service companies. That's a deep cut. But yeah, no, this is a good. Let's save that for the year in review, because kind of where do they go from here? I think is going to be a good
Uh,
subject.
I'm going to end it on this, Joe, unless you have something to add. And I'm going to give credit to GM because they effectively invented the first electric vehicle. They scrapped it on their own. They invented the connected vehicle. OnStar did nothing with it because OnStar is basically the first connected vehicle.
Absolutely,
And
no, 100%,
then,
absolutely.
and so, they also uh, acquired Cruise. Okay, so they were there. It's just that the bean counters are way too heavy in their decision making power in that decision making process, and I think that it's hard to keep a loss leader on your books. But
Yeah.
I think, and don't get me wrong, Waymo and Alphabet has 150 billion dollars in the bank that they can spend on a Waymo. The OEMs don't, but you
No.
got to give credit for their vision. You got to give credit to GM for some of that
They saw
visionary
they
view.
no, I'll agree with that. They saw, Mary Barr and the people around her saw that that was a path they had to explore. And it's tough. It's tough. You're right. I mean, yeah, there's another whole podcast. I mean, I listen to car companies talk about getting into AI, and then you go look at what the capital spending that real AI companies are able to muster, like Amazon or Google or even OpenAI, or certainly NVIDIA. I mean, the capital budgets that these companies are basically, they spend in a month what a car company spends in a year. So yeah, it's tough. It's hard to play these games. Yeah.
Oh, and one last thing about GM, Hughes. Remember satellites?
Oh, I
Remember that?
remember. No, I remember
So
as an auto writer, I went out to Hughes because GM owned Hughes and GM was my beat. And I was standing there looking at satellites and stuff like that out in a Hughes lab, Hughes, because factory or lab if you in
El
California. Of course,
Segundo. It was in El
yeah,
Segundo.
it was really cool. I had absolutely no idea what was how to evaluate any of what I was seeing. But anyway.
And
Yeah.
that's the challenge, right? Because you look at these auto companies and they have these analysts that are auto analysts. So the if they see a creep up in R&D expense, they actually make that a negative towards an auto company. But if they were tech analysts and they saw increases in R&D spend for opportunities in the future, maybe they don't get those dings. But again, hey,
Okay.
this was a great conversation. And I'm looking forward in 2 weeks to our year review because I'm going to do my homework. I know you're going to do your homework. So it should be an amazing
Yeah, it should be fun.
year in review for 2025 episodes. So,
All right. Well, join us everyone, and thanks for watching. And we'll have clips up on YouTube, right? Too, at some
yes, we
point
will.
in the near future. All right.
And hopefully in January, we will launch the audio podcast of At the Wheel to help us a little bit with some of our other listeners. But Joe, great talking to you. We will see you next week, hopefully at the Zingerman's Roadhouse.
Yeah, that'll be good. We can see you there. All right, bye.